Hello and welcome to week 2 of the Baptist Renew program. Tonight we are going to be talking about reading food labels. I'd encourage you to grab something out of your pantry and you can go through the label with me as we discuss. And if you have any questions at the end, please feel free to email me or reach out to me and we'll go over them. So let's go ahead and get started and look more in depth at the food label. Okay. So, when we look at the food label, it can be tempting to want to jump ahead and go ahead and start looking at the calories or the fat or the total sugars, things like that, the different things we want to read. But it's always, always, always important that the number one thing you always look at first at on the food label is the serving size. It can be easy to skip over, but everything on the label is based on one serving size. So if you look at my example here, you'll see the serving size is 2/3 of a cup, but there's 8 servings per container. So this entire label is based on 2/3 of a cup. But if you were to eat, let's say, half the container, you would need to actually multiply everything by 4 to really know how much you ate. So you didn't eat 230 calories if you ate half the package. You really ate over 800 calories by eating 4 servings. So it's important to always look at the serving size first. But the other critical step here is you have to compare your serving size, your portion to the serving size. So it doesn't do you any good to say, oh, 2/3 cup, 230 calories, if your serving size is actually 2 or 3 of those servings. So I'd really encourage you, especially at the beginning, to measure out or count out what is the correct portion size. You can always go back for more, but if you're trying to really get a good idea of how much you're eating, you really need to measure. So your cereals, your rice, your dried goods, get your measuring cups out and measure those things. Make sure that if it's something that you can count, like a bag of chips or pieces of candy, that you count out how many that you're having. With time, you'll get a little bit better about knowing, okay, this is about 1 serving's worth of my cereal, this is about 1 serving worth of rice. But at the beginning, it's really going to help you to get your measuring cups back out and really get an idea of how much it is that you're actually eating. After you've figured out the serving size, then you can move on to calories. So, what are calories? Calories can tend to get a bad rap. We hear about, bad calories, counting calories. They can be frustrating, always feeling like we're needing to cut calories. But really, we need to put calories back in their correct place. And a calorie is just simply a measurement of energy. How much energy am I getting from my food, or how much energy am I burning through my movement? So if you think about food as an energy source, it can help you to be smarter with your calories. Choose those foods that are going to be good sources of energy, that are going to give you calories that are high in nutrition, and not just empty calories that are high in fat or sugar, but not really giving you a lot of nutritional value back. You can think about your calories like a budget. So everyone gets a set amount of calories per day. Let's just say, for example, your amount is 2,000 calories. That gives you a budget of 2,000 that you can decide how you want to spend those calories, but you only get that 2,000. So if you spend 1,000 calories on one meal, that only leaves you 1,000 remaining calories for other foods in your day. So be smart with your budget. Choose foods that are going to help fill you up, but not use a lot of your budget so that you can stretch that budget further. So, in general, this is just kind of a general thumb rule guideline. You want your meals to be around 500 calories or less, and a snack should be 1 to 200 calories. Okay, so remember we talked about last class how smaller meals more often our body prefers that and tends to operate better with that. So, doing those smaller meals, does that mean that if you eat a high calorie meal, you've ruined everything? No, it doesn't. So, you can still plan for the occasional, I'm going out to eat for dinner tonight. I know that this meal is going to be a little bit higher calorie. And so, what you would want to do is adjust the calories in the meals for the rest of your day to help save you some calories for that higher calorie meal. In general, though, you want to try to keep your meals around the same amount of calories, around the same schedule each day, and your body's just going to prefer that. Remember that fat free does not equal calorie free, sugar free does not equal calorie free, organic does not equal calorie free, high in protein does not equal calorie free. There's all kinds of labels or things put on the food label to help encourage us to buy. But that does not mean that it's something that fits into our plan or that it doesn't have calories. So if you eat those things, you have to make sure you're still accounting for the calories that come from those things. So think about nutrient dense versus calorie dense foods. So, what does that mean? It means choosing foods that are high in nutritional value, that are going to give you lots of vitamins and minerals and really give you a lot of bang for your buck, as opposed to foods that are going to be high in sugar or high in fat and aren't really giving you a lot back nutritionally. So, if you look at my two examples, you could eat all of those fruits and vegetables for 239 calories, or you could have one soda. And all those fruits and vegetables, not only are they going to fill you up, they're going to give you all of those vitamins and minerals. Whereas, what is a soda going to give you? Nothing but sugar, right? So if you think about your food like a budget and you use your budget on things that are going to give you high nutrients as opposed to just high empty calories, you're going to get a lot further with your budget. You're going to feel fuller, you're going to feel more content. You have to be careful with your snacks, okay? Just because something is a small portion doesn't mean that it might be the calories of a snack. So if you look at my example here, I've got a orange juice and a Cheetos. This is something we could grab from a vending machine or at a gas station, and we would definitely probably lump this in the snack pile, right? However, if you look at the calories, it's 440 calories. It's really closer to the value of a meal. So sometimes those snacks can creep up on us because we're really eating closer to the value of a meal, but we're thinking that it's more like a snack. So think about that nutrient dense we just talked about. Over here on the right, I have a low fat string cheese, which is a great source of protein, an apple, and a water. That's only about 140 calories and is going to fit much better in the category of a snack. So not only is it lower calorie, it's also high in nutritional value. After the calories, you can start to look at the fat. So this includes your unsaturated, your saturated, and your trans. So all those numbers add up to make the total fat. One of the reasons we want to keep an eye on fat is because fat is higher than calories than the other nutrients. So fat is 9 calories per gram, whereas um, your carbohydrates and your proteins are 4 calories per gram. So there's not a quiz on this, but that's just simply to let you know that when you eat foods that are higher in fat, they're also going to be higher in calories. And that's whether that's a good, heart healthy fat or those saturated or trans fats. Anything high in fat can also be high in calories. So you have to really be mindful of the portion size. If you're working on cholesterol and heart health, this is the part of the label that you really want to pay attention to, um, more so than the actual cholesterol on the food label. So looking at the total fat and the saturated fat and the trans fat can help you improve your cholesterol numbers. And we'll go into more on that in a second. Now, knowing how much fat to have can be tricky. So, there's actually a little trick that you can use for the entire food label. So, if you'll see here, it says percent daily value. And a general rule of thumb is 5% is low and 20% is high. You can use that for fat, saturated fat, fiber, sugar, any of those things. And it's a quick, easy way to tell you if something is low in fat, low in sodium, low in sugar, or high in one of those areas. So you can see that this is 10%. So that's kind of like middle of the road. But what you can see is it's 20% added sugar. So it's pretty high in that added sugar category, whereas it's only 7% in sodium, it's maybe not as high in sodium. And that can kind of give you a good idea of a gauge of how to look at the entire label. So with your fats, you've got three kinds. Your unsaturated fats, you can kind of think of like a green light. These are your fats that are those heart healthy fats that could actually have health benefits like lowering cholesterol, but also helping you to feel more satisfied. So having some fat in your diet actually helps with fullness. And these are your sources of fat that can be good sources of fat. Remember, though, that a little bit goes a long way. So it still can be high in calories. So, for example, peanut butter. 2 tablespoons of peanut butter is 200 calories. While peanut butter can be a good source of heart healthy fat, can be a source of protein, can help fill you up, if you just go to town with a jar and a spoon, you can really get a lot of calories there, right? So, a little bit of peanut butter goes a long way. So those unsaturated fats would be things like your olives, your nuts and seeds, your avocados, those heart healthy fish that have the omegas like salmon, your olive oils and canola oils. Those can be options for you for some sources of unsaturated fat. Your saturated fat is one you want to keep an eye on, especially if you're working on improving your cholesterol or trying to work on um, your weight. So, this is kind of a yellow light. This doesn't mean you can't have it, but it means you want to be mindful of it and try to reduce it where you can. So think about what you're buying. These are foods that are typically solid at room temperature. A lot of your processed foods, your packaged foods, your fried foods, your fatty meats, these are all going to be high in that saturated fat. So you can think about ways that you could maybe reduce the fat in some of these items. So just for example, um, maybe doing turkey bacon as opposed to regular bacon, um, baking your chicken as opposed to frying it, cutting potatoes into wedges as opposed to eating fries. This cut of steak, getting a leaner, such as a steak round, as opposed to a fattier steak. There's all kinds of ways you can work on reducing the fat in things that you're buying, but don't forget about things that you may be adding. If you're putting a lot of butter on things or a lot of cheese, if you're frying a lot of things in oil, your 2% and your whole milk are higher than your skim and your 1%. Your creamy dressings and your full fat dressings, your fatty, creamy sauces like Alfredo sauce or mayonnaise, all of those things are going to have saturated fat. So, you can work on substituting, like I mentioned, the 1% or the skim milk, or you can also follow the rule of how much, how often. So, for example, with cheese, for me, hamburger is not a hamburger without cheese. I have to have cheese on it. So I choose to put cheese on that. But a salad, I don't really feel like I need the cheese in there, so I leave it out. So by kind of picking and choosing when you need it instead of adding cheese to everything, you can work on improving your amount of saturated fat you're getting each day. And then trans fat, this would be your red light. These are artificial fats. They're man-made, and there's not really an amount. that we would consider healthy. So they can affect cholesterol levels, they can affect weight levels. And there's actually a law that's been passed that they have to, within the next few years, eliminate trans fats from our foods. But until then, we're going to have to search the label to see if things contain trans fat. So remember, this is a man made fat that they put in foods to help with the shelf life. So it's not going to be in your, typically in your fruits and vegetables and your fresh meats and things like that. It's going to be in things that are processed that have a long shelf life. um, Partially hydrogenated oil is the key word for trans fat. So you really have to do some investigating, look at the ingredient list. If there's less than a half a gram of trans fat in the serving, they don't have to put it on the label. So you'll see here with these crescent rolls, it says no trans fat, but if you look in the ingredient list, it says partially hydrogenated soybean oil. So there is actually trans fat in this product. So when you're looking at the grocery store, you want to try to keep an eye out and choose products that don't contain that trans fat and then that are lower in that saturated fat. Remember, we said that if you're working on cholesterol, you really want to monitor more so the fats in foods than the cholesterol. So the next on the list would be your sodium. Less than 140 milligrams is a good low sodium choice, whereas something that's over 300 milligrams per serving is probably getting too high and something you probably want to skip and choose for a different alternative. Remember that sodium, a large portion of it, comes from processed and packaged foods because we're putting salt in things to add shelf life. So the more you can get things kind of fresher, closer to the ground, to the way they came out of the earth, the lower sodium they're typically going to be. You are starting to see a lot more of no salt added products, like no salt added beans and canned vegetables. So those can be options because they're not going to have all of the sodium that your traditional canned bean or canned vegetable is going to have. Remember that just because something might be a low sodium product does not make it low fat or low calorie. So you really have to look at the entire label, not just pick and choose what nutrient you want to monitor. So things that can help you reduce sodium, less processed, fresh or frozen, making your own, those types of things are going to help you to drastically reduce the sodium. So if you look at the comparison here, ramen noodles versus boiling your own noodles, you go from 1700 milligrams of sodium to 61. Preparing your own chicken as opposed to buying a pre-made package, a frozen package of green beans compared to a canned green bean, a potato compared to a French fry. So it's not that we can't eat these foods, but if we pay attention to how they're prepared and the type and what we're buying, we can really save ourselves a lot of milligrams of sodium, but also oftentimes too, that means it's going to be less fat or less calories or less sugar by switching to kind of the closer to the way it came out of the ground. You can also experiment with new flavors. So keep an eye on your condiments. Look for salt free seasonings and herbs. So it's typically your mixed seasonings that are going to contain a lot of sodium. So if you get something like thyme, oregano, garlic powder, which just strictly the seasoning, it's not going to have all that extra sodium. They also have sodium substitutes like Mrs. Dash that you can use. Any kind of fresh herb like a cilantro, rosemary, oregano, those can all be great options. Your pepper. So there's, just because you're trying to reduce the salt doesn't mean you can't have flavor. Just experiment with new ways. And a lot of times, too, if you look online, you can find alternatives. So, for example, a taco seasoning. If you look it up, you can actually find what spices go into taco seasoning and make your own and drastically reduce the sodium just by using like cumin and garlic powder and chili powder instead of buying a pre-made taco seasoning mix. So you could definitely look up some of your favorite seasonings and see what might be some alternatives for you. And then know what you're eating. So if you're going out to eat, we're going to have a whole class on going out to eat and strategies. But it's really helpful to look the labels up ahead of time. Just know that typically when you go out to eat, it's going to be a lot higher sodium than something that you prepare at home. But if you look it up, you can often find things that you could substitute or trade out that could help you. So if you look at just for example, this Southwest chicken salad, it's 1,000 milligrams of sodium, but you might find that if you order the unseasoned chicken, if you get the dressing on the side, things like that, you can reduce the sodium because you're adding these things on yourself as opposed to buying their pre-made version of it. So just being informed and looking things up ahead of time can also help you to reduce your sodium. Then you have your carbohydrates. So that includes in that total your fiber as well as your sugar and your added sugar. Okay. If you are diabetic or pre diabetic, you might be paying more attention to the carbohydrates. You might be counting carbohydrates because these are the things that can affect your blood sugar. Um, but for most of us, you kind of want to pay attention to what's going on within those carbohydrates. So, fiber. We want to get fiber. Fiber helps with cholesterol. It's wonderful for heart health. It helps with weight loss. And it really helps with that feeling of fullness. So, for example, if you've ever had a bowl of oatmeal, that sticks with you a lot longer than a bowl of sugary cereal, right? That's because that oatmeal is very high in fiber. So, it's helping you to stay full. Most of us fall short of getting enough fiber in the day. So look for ways to increase your fiber, getting more of those fruits and vegetables, choosing whole grains, getting things with the skin on closer to the way they came out of the ground, less refined, less processed. That's going to be a better source of fiber for you typically. But you also want to take a look at the sugar. So, is something high in sugar? And they've added a new category to the label, which is added sugars. And this is really helpful because previously it was just sugar, and you didn't really have a way of knowing, well, is that sugar coming from something natural like a fruit or a dairy product, or is it something they added in? And now they'll tell you if they added it in. So you can see 10 grams of added sugar, 20%, it's pretty high, right? So 4 grams of sugar is a teaspoon. So just to put it in perspective for you, so something that has 10 grams of sugar is going to have 2.5 teaspoons of added sugar in that one serving. Women typically want about 6 teaspoons of sugar a day, whereas men, it's about 9. The average American is getting about 19 teaspoons of sugar a day, which is about 66 pounds or 6 bags of Domino sugar added each year. So you really want to pay attention to the sugar and see where it is and see if you can work on reducing it and help reduce that number. So look for high fiber foods as opposed to simple sugar foods. So your high fiber foods are going to be once again those foods that are less processed, closer to the way they came out of the ground. Your non-starchy veggies, your starchy veggies, and your whole grains, your fruits. Those are all going to be wonderful sources of fiber. And they're not going to have that added sugar that things like sweets, your refined or your enriched flour products, your sugary cereals, and your sugary drinks. We can really pile it on with sugary beverages, such as fancy coffee drinks, sodas, energy drinks, sports drinks. All of those things can really add in a lot of extra sugar into our diet. So, the final thing that you want to do is review the ingredient. list. So the main ingredients are listed first. So if something says, let's say you're looking at a can of fruit, if it says sugar, water, pineapples, you know that that can of fruit has more sugar in it than it does pineapples. Probably not the can of pineapples you want to reach for, right? You would prefer one that is just pineapple and water. So the main ingredients are the key ingredients. Look for keywords like partially hydrogenated oil, which is that trans fat, sugar, all the sugar words that end in OSE, like dextrose, sucrose, lactose. Um, those can be your sugar words. Your refined or your enriched flour, as opposed to whole grain, and choose items with whole foods listed as the main ingredients. So if you look at the ingredient list and it's a bunch of words you can't pronounce and it sounds like it came out of a chemical factory, it's probably not the food, the item that you want to choose, right? So I would encourage you this week, um, as you are thinking about your food choices, go through your pantry, see what's in there, get informed, look at the labels. That doesn't mean you need to throw out everything in your pantry. I know we don't want to waste food, um, but it can help you moving forward as you're thinking about what to buy. So, your next trip to the grocery store, it might take a little longer. You might be spending a lot more time comparing products. But the good news is, once you figure out what the best product is for you, then you know. So, for example, it might take you a little while to sort salad dressings and figure out, which one do I like, but that also has a good nutritional profile for me. And once you know that, now you can get it every time and it takes less time. Like I said, your next trip to the grocery store might take you a little bit longer. Take along that My Plate grocery list. That I sent to you guys. That can be a wonderful guide to help you making some decisions. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, send me your label, and I'll help look over it with you. But I hope you enjoyed reading food labels, and I'll see you next week for our next class.